All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Silkin podcast. And our webinar for today is From Chaos to Control: How to Build a High Performing Team That Runs Your Practice Like a Business. So, as we go through this, definitely, if you have any questions, we're going to have a Q&A session at the end. So, feel free to ask any questions that you'd like. And let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to bring on my amazing co-host, Mr. Dave McKevitt, and just go ahead and give us a brief background for anybody whose first time is here with us.
Hello, guys. Thanks, Julia. Well, I've been doing consulting with healthcare professionals I always have to recompute it, 20, 26 years, something, a long time, 30, excuse me. And all kinds of healthcare professionals, the odd other kind of business, construction business here and there, several of them actually. One time we had a client that was Catholic Relief Services. Interestingly, that was kind of an unusual one. A lot of fun. But so I've been with Silkin for about over 30 of those years, and love what I do and love helping people get their practices under control, which is why I do what I do. That's about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Control, right? I think that's a great way to put it. I think sometimes when we receive clients and we start working with them, that's one of the things that they express, right? Is I don't have control, or I don't know how to control it, or I don't feel like anything is in my control, and they're kind of whirling and spinning. And it's very easy to, have that happen. And that's why we're here.
Amen.
Good. So let's go ahead and get started on today's topic, a high performing team that runs your practice like a business. How is a practice similar to a business?
Well, it's not similar to a business. It is a business. It's a special kind of business, but it is a business. I mean, you have to pay the bills. You have to make a profit. You're delivering a product. The product is good service to your patients or clients. So there's really no distinction between a practice and a business.
Right, exactly. Which is interesting because as we know that healthcare professionals go to school to be excellent at what they do, to be the best doctors technically, medically. They have tremendous grasp of knowledge on their field. And one for one, I think any medical professional that we've worked with have been just tremendous doctors, but it is the business that they are missing. It is the understanding of how to run a business, all the parts of a business, how to make a business profitable. That goes missing. That's not what's included in medical school for them. And so they receive and feel the negative effects of not having that information. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, if they get any management or business education, it's a lick and a promise. And that's where organizations like ours come in. We fill that gap. And as luck would have it, state associations will grant a very certain amount of CE credit for the training you do business-wise and managerially. And so we're able to also supply all of our clients with some CE credit for doing this kind of work. But whether they got CE or not, it's critical to their success. And running a business is not antipathetic to good service. In fact, it enhances your ability to deliver good service. If you're not well organized, if you're not well managed, there will be a lot more problems, a lot of inefficiencies, which detract from the quality of the service you provide. So it's not like a separate thing. It's actually part of the woof and warp of your success as a practicing doctor.
Right, exactly. So let's get into staff. We know that that's typically a hot topic amongst practice owners. It's one of the bigger problems that practice owners face. And so when we're talking about accountability, right, how do we create a culture of accountability where individuals and team members actually take ownership for themselves?
I think the first step in that is to make a very clear statement in writing, please, of how you want it to be. How do you want your practice to be? How do you want your reception area to be, your accounts area to be, your clinical area to be? Um, with a little bit of detail, not just they do great. That would not be an adequate description, because your concept of what you want is something that you have to have firmly established in your own mind so that you can see where you're departing from that. So you can define what you need to work on to get to that level. And also, you have that as a statement to convey to your staff to let them know what the standard is you want them to be aspiring to. Without that well defined, you're still kind of wandering around in the weeds. So that's a beginning step to me that's critical. That would include, of course, adherence to your mission statement and having a well conveyed mission statement that's not just something you got from AI or like from Google or something. It's something that's heartfelt. It really reflects why you became a doctor, um, which involves your purpose, the purpose of you being a doctor and the purpose for having a practice. That would also include a statement of all your core values, um, the most basic principles that we operate on that guide us in the way we conduct business. So that's a place to start, and then you got to find, of course, the right people. Now that of course is the rub. Um, that's the difficult piece, but even there, you have to have a good concept in your mind of what is a right person. Is it a person with a business degree, or a highly trained clinical degree or license of some kind? Maybe, but in our experience, those can be highly overrated, quite frankly. What you're really looking for are people who are willing. I use the word willing advisedly. It doesn't mean that they will do what they're told to do. It means they want to. They're eager. Willing really means they're eager to help and to do the right thing. So you want to find willing people, and you want to find really upbeat, positive people. And so many times I've seen over the years a doctor hire somebody who had great background, a fabulous resume, credentials galore, and they were not an upbeat person. That is not a recipe for accomplishing a high performing team that runs your practice like a business.
Yeah. Yeah. A couple things there. One in terms of writing down what you want, right? And I think sometimes, or a lot of the times when doctors or owners come to us, they don't even want to write that down or express it because they think it's so far outside of what can be accomplished. They're mired down with stress, and they're mired down with bad staff, and they're mired down with low profitability. It's like, I just want to break even type of a conversation. And it's really the wrong way to think, right? And we really work with them, and you can see things start to change when we allow them to, and we promote to them like, hey, you got to think big. You gotta have big dreams. You gotta have big goals. Like, what was when you decided to become this doctor, dentist, vet, opto, whatever it is, what did it look like? Why? What did it look like? What were your dreams? What did you want to have? And that becoming their ideal scene, right? That becoming something to push towards that's bigger than breaking even. Because we know a lot of the times, right, one of the biggest failures or why people failure in society is a misestimation of effort. And so if all you want to do is break even, you're only going to push to that point. I think we stated in the last webinar we did on the finance and profitability, your practice is only going to make what you perceive it needs to make, right? And so getting out of that mired down, and you need assistance, you need someone to help you. That's tough to do. You're mired down with a lot of things, but now you have this ideal scene, and you take your existing scene, like you said, and you bridge the gap, right? And what systems have to be in place, and what policies have to be in place, and what staff, what team members have to be in place for that gap to get bridged. And it's a tremendous thing to do, but yet a lot of the times it's two of those missing pieces that have to get put in. And when get put in, sometimes, I would say the large majority of the time, these owners go, oh my gosh, I never thought this was possible.
Indeed. And also to keep in mind that the bridging the gap between the existing scene or situation, state of affairs, and the way you would like it to be is you're not going to do it overnight. It's not a leaping tall buildings in a single bound kind of a deal. You go up the steps, and that could be a long haul. The main thing is you need to keep moving up the steps. It's a gradient scale kind of a process. And you have to have ways of measuring your progress statistically to be able to see that you are progressing, even if you're not all the way there. But you have that ideal scene written out so you don't lose sight of the top of the mountain. And that analogy works. I mean, having climbed a number of mountains in my days, on the route, there are times when, where's the peak? Oh, that's the peak. Oh my gosh, this isn't the peak. Oh, the peak's still over there. Oh, this one's, because you have your ups and your downs, you will. But if the general trend is in upward direction, you will finally arrive at the peak.
Right.
So it's a lot of work to do. You got to get the right staff, as we talked about, and you have to be willing to go through the process to find the right staff. If you get too desperate, and I just need a warm body, there might be some extreme situations where you do need a warm body, but you got to understand that this is a temporary patch to the situation, and is just a stepping stone toward really accomplishing my ideal scene.
Right. So one of the things you just mentioned in terms of knowing you have to measure performance, you have to measure accomplishment, right? And so, let's just jump into that. What are the key metrics to track team productivity?
Well, the overall productivity of practice, the most major ones, of course, are your production, the dollar value of what you're doing, how much production you're chunking out, how much of that are you collecting, obviously critical. That ties into how many patients you're seeing, patients seen, and that's going to be broken into two sections. There's going to be new patients that you see that are now joining your practice, and the patients that are repeat patients that are coming back. And you want to monitor both of those because you want continued growth of new patients, but you also want to know that you're doing a good job of retaining and maintaining the patient base that you've got. So those are key. And then, of course, gross profit or net profit, excuse me. That's a really critical one. So those are like the big five, I would say, for the overall practice. But also you want to know that you have to have stats that measure the productivity of the key areas of the practice, the front desk. What are they producing? Well, they're producing a full schedule. Is a big piece of what they're scheduling. So there are ways of measuring that. Several ways of measuring that, actually. And then there the clinical area. They are providing the facility to you, the doctor, in the back that enable you to be as efficient as you can, which makes you more productive per unit of time. So there are ways of measuring the efficiency that they create for you. And of course, you want to be tracking how much you're collecting relative to how much you should be collecting. So you want to be paying attention to your accounts receivable and make sure that's not getting too big. Sometimes we get new clients and the accounts receivable is jaw-droppingly horrific. Like, what do you what? What?
Yeah, like upwards of $500,000, and
Yeah,
yeah,
you're leaving a lot of money on the table there,
yeah,
buddy. So those are some, and you can get down into the weeds even more specifically than that for different types of situations. Some statistics are perennial stats, and then there's some statistics that I call training wheel stats. In other words, there's something that you want to put in place and make sure it's really firmly in place, and so you have a stat that measures that. And once it's firmly established, the amount of time spent statusizing it, you kind of hit the law of return. It's more work to keep the stat than no. We got it. We got this. Okay. Well, you'll know when it drops out because you'll start getting hit upside the head with the fact it's not being done. So there's those two kinds of stats, and your consultant can help you determine when a training wheel stat is needed and when it's no longer needed. But the big five are those are perennials.
right, right. Yeah, and one of the things, right, two things to touch on is net profit, and this can be an interesting statistic to track, and there's when we talk about profitability, right, we want to ensure that the practice is at an X percent profitability. Now it changes, it varies from profession to profession, but we could probably safely say that everyone needs to be above a 25% profitability, right? That's kind of like the bare minimum. And so there's a few ways, because a lot of the times when we get clients, it's like, well, I'm not profitable. I need to increase profitability. And what we find in terms of the first thing that they fail to do is I think two things. One is really understanding your hourly cost. What is your hourly cost to run your practice? How how long of appointments are you running? So let's say you're running 30-minute appointments and you know that it costs X amount of dollars per hour per chair to run your practice. And so how much is that service actually costing you, right? And then cost is an interesting word because when we're talking about cost, we're not talking again about this break even, that minimum. I just want to be in the black. I don't want to be losing money, right? We're talking about what salary do you want to make? We're talking about a 10% off the top draw for the owner. We're talking about an additional 11% that needs to go into very specific accounts so that you have this buffer, right? So that you're really set up for expansion and for continual growth, and anything that comes your way, you're able to tackle. Right. So that's one of the things that we find in terms of when we start working with owners and we start looking at profitability off of your P&Ls. Yes, you need to look at your P&Ls on a regular basis. And the other thing is really understanding the percent of profitability for each service and or product that you're providing. And this is where you really have to break things down and break them out. You have to have some comparables of people, sure, in your industry, nationwide, regionally, locally, right? Because you just need to have, anytime you're evaluating a piece of information, you have to have a datum of comparable magnitude for it to have any worth, right? And then you go, great, so, ideally, I want to be at a 35% profitability. Well, if you're only at 11% for every service and or product that you provide, 35, you're not going to get there. And so, you have to do a few things. One, yes, you need to look at your expenses. And then two, you need to look at, well, where is the most profitability being made in these areas? How can I do more of that? Can I increase fees? If you just look at inflation, because, I find it common with my clients. I don't know, Dave, that, the purpose that doctor got into the profession typically is to help others, right? And so increasing fees is not always the easiest thing for them to do, right? But if you just look at what happens with inflation year over year, we're at basically a 3%. You can argue it either way, depending on what you go look at. But you go good. So if I'm not increasing my fees at least 3%, I'm leaving money. I'm losing money, right? The value of the dollar that I'm now collecting has just lost. And so, there's a lot to go into. And then measuring statistics, because the profitability is kind of like, if you took one look at one statistic and went, well, what is measuring the efficiency of any business, right? You could argue that it's probably that statistic. So you have all these other statistics that drive that statistic. You have the efficiency of your staff. You have the right people you put on board. You have your systems in place. And all of these things together then drives the profitability of the practice. So
Yeah, as you say that, there's one other forever stat that you were reminding me of that I didn't mention, and that is a statistic that we call your gross income divided by your number of staff. When we say number of staff, we mean number of full-time equivalents, because maybe you have 2 part-time staff. We'll count them as one. And this doesn't have to be microscopically exact, but it needs to be a pretty good idea of in a month. This is a monthly stat. In a month's time, how many full-time equivalent staff do we have, including the doctor or doctors? If you're full-time and you have a half-time associate, that's 1.5 full-time equivalents. So you figure this out and you divide your collection by that number of people that are producing that. That is a really interesting and effective efficiency stat. Because if you're way overstaffed or you're staffed with a bunch of people who are not very productive and then therefore not generating much income, that stat, of course, is going to be low. The number of staff divided into the amount that you're bringing in. If you're very productive and very efficient, that stat's going to be a whole lot higher. So just to your point, Julia, on the efficiency factor and having a way of monitoring that's a very useful stat.
Yeah, excellent. And great addition there, we short term it GI by divided by, right?
Right.
So yeah.
Gross income divided by. Yeah.
Yeah. So then let's talk about the structure first formula. What aligns people, systems, and goals?
Well, what aligns them is the purpose of the activity, the purpose and the goals of the activity. And what I find is that very often they're the basic goals of the practice. If you have a dental practice, everybody knows why we're here. Our purpose, our goal is to help people have healthy teeth and keep their teeth for a lifetime and all that kind of. But your personal practice goals and ideals are, I would bet, not identical to the guy down the street who's a dentist for a variety of reasons. Your interests in practice, perhaps your demographics, your philosophy of practice, different things. The main thing we find is that purpose is not sufficiently communicated to the staff so that they're really tracking with that and contributing to the motion that's going to accomplish that. So having that laid out, again, laying it out very clearly for your staff is one thing. And then the other thing is, of course, providing people with good job descriptions, which means each job has the list of duties and expectations connected with it. All the procedures are ideally, and again, this doesn't happen overnight, but ideally are all laid out in writing. Every hat in the house knows exactly what they're supposed to be producing. Any hat is understandable by its product. Any hat. If you're cooking dinner and you're wearing your cook hat, you have a stateable product.
Well, let's define this a little bit, right? Because that's a very powerful statement. And obviously, I agree. It's very true. But what product is a tech producing? What product is a receptionist producing? A front desk, a lead?
Well, good. So let's take them one at a time. A tech or assistant in the back is creating, I would say, a fully facilitated doctor so that the doctor can run through his or her procedures with in the most efficient manner. In other words, the doctor's not having to do things that somebody else could do. Somebody else can set up the trays. Somebody else can sanitize the room. Somebody else can do this piece of lab work. If the doctor's doing that, and very early on when you're just beginning and growing, you may be wearing all those hats. But if you continue to wear all those hats, you will not grow. You start delegating them off and passing hats that somebody else could do for you. So that's the product of somebody in the back. And there are a variety of ways of measuring that productivity. In the front, it's an effectively, properly scheduled appointment book. I say properly, and every doctor here can, I know, relate to that, because you can have an appointment book that's filled with, say, non-production, or it's overburdened with a certain kind of productivity that's going to burn you out first thing in the day, and you're going to be worthless the rest of the day. Or there are different ways in which you would like to see the schedule controlled, that word control again, and managed, same thing, so that you're optimally busy. And it's a receptionist product is to accomplish that scheduling, that kind of a schedule. And there are different ways of statusizing how that's done. As for your leads, I mean, your leads, their product, if you think about it, you probably already understand this, but the product of a lead is that everybody in their area under them, even if they're a player manager, I am a receptionist and I'm wearing the reception. I'm also the lead receptionist, meaning I'm supervising everybody else in the area. Your product is every one of your juniors, if you will, is themselves being productive, efficiently productive. So so you have a productive department, and it means each individual in it is productive. So you have to have a way of perceiving that. A lot of it's just eyeball. You're there, you're looking at it, you see it, whether it's happening or not. And if it's falling short, then because you're the lead, you have the authorization to address it with more training or correction. If it's disciplinary, you might discipline them, or you might pass them to an office manager for more of a disciplinary type action. But the training has got to be provided. That investment has got to be made. And one of the just to speak on that for a moment is a very large issue in most practices that I've worked with over the years is they don't easily invest the amount of time that needs to be invested in training their staff. And it's a false economy. Doctors know if they're not producing, they're not making money. Okay. So if we're training, we're not producing, we're not making money. We need to, well, okay. But you have to look at it like for what it is. It's an investment. So when you're training, you're actually making future money that you would not have made anywhere near as efficiently if you didn't train. So being willing to provide that training, and if you have willing people who will, they're eager to do the right thing, that they will gobble it up, and that you will really enhance your practice. So
let's
anyway.
say I mean, training it's just undeniably one of, if not the biggest reasons why we see practices start become efficient, and especially a fully trained, functioning office manager who's operating as your CEO, who can just run your practice. You need to remove yourself as a manager, as the owner, right? Right now, if you look at yourself as an owner and you're also a doctor, you actually are wearing three hats. You're probably being a doctor, right? Probably being an owner, which those two you chose. You wanted to do that. But now you're also being an executive. To some degree, you may be trying to manage your staff, and it's just way too much, right? And so when you run into inefficiencies, and the solution is to get an office manager who is the right person, and get them fully trained, and it's just production. Everything goes up, life becomes easier, stress becomes less. Now it's not a one-hit wonder where you train somebody one time and you never have to correct them or train them again. But it's like sports. Once you see an improvement in an area, you're going to tend to continue to do that because you see the result. And in sports, you see it a little more instantly than in other areas of life, but it very much is that for the individual, right? And so with that, so let's say, and I think one of the things, accountability, managing staff, underperformance, right? You have these expectations and you're like, gosh, my staff or this person or this individual is just underperforming. What is the solution? What is the correct thing to do when you run into a situation like that?
Well, when you do, one thing is to not let underperformance drift along unaddressed. And many practices do that. They're hoping for some kind of spontaneous healing or something, and crossing their fingers, going on hoping. But you shouldn't do that. If you see something that's not up to the standard you're requiring, address it. And it doesn't mean tearing a strip off anybody. It certainly doesn't mean throwing instruments or something wild and crazy, but you address it. You have a conversation and find out what that person was thinking to operate that way, or what they don't know, or what they disagree with. You might find some kind of a disagreement or some other consideration that's affecting their ability to do what they should be doing. And through conversation, address it. Sometimes you find out that they don't really understand what they're supposed to be doing adequately, so you have to retrain them. Sometimes they're just not familiar enough with it to do it consistently and smoothly, so drill. We promote, we pound actually on the idea of drilling people. In other words, have them do it over and over, like practicing the scales on the piano when you're a kid learning piano lessons. You do it over until you feel comfortable with it. That's probably one of the most neglected tools because people generally don't like to drill. And management people at any level often kind of back off from doing it because it's kind of uncomfortable for them, and that means it's uncomfortable for me. Well, get over it. And if you do it, you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck per unit of time. I mean, in terms of the investment of time in training, drilling will get you the biggest result in the least amount of time. So,
right. And I think with that is proper drilling, and the uncomfortability is definitely something that we run into when we go through our workshops, and we force, one could say, we ensure, we watch, we coach the practice owners and their OMs in correcting staff, right? And drilling them and ensuring, and one for one, I would say there's probably one client that I have who does not have a lot of back off in the area and does it very well, but it's uncomfortable, and there's a lot of fumbling going on with the words. There's a lot of, what do I say, what don't I say, I don't want to reach, I don't want to micromanage, that comes into play, but it is the drilling, it is the correction. People do need to be corrected. Sometimes individuals and staff need some assistance with some discipline, and we're not talking about punishing people, but we are talking about ensuring that standards are met, policy is followed. Because if you look at the idea of policy, and when we talk about job description manuals and things of that nature, the only reason it's there is to help you achieve your goals. And if those aren't followed, then I think it's, at the same time, simply put, on the reverse side. But go ahead, you're going to say something?
No, I was acknowledging. I agree with that completely.
Yeah.
And again, you don't have to. It's a conversation. A correction is a conversation. It's not a punishment type of a thing. If it becomes disciplinary, then it gets a little bit more disciplinary.
Sure, totally.
Somebody being written up, which is, people really don't. if they're willing, they're horrified to be written up. I mean, in my career, I've been written up before. I go, oh my
Sure.
gosh, oh, I'm so ashamed. It's a high motivation, to which is another thing, just as a general principle I'd like to throw in, is that we talk about statistics and performance toward the ideal way of performing. You want to always be applying this basic principle of stat management. Most basic principle of stat management that there is you reward up statistics and you penalize down statistics. Penalizing, again, doesn't mean you're tearing strips off of people, but it does mean that they're maybe not going to get an award, or they're not going to get an award that the rest of the staff does get because their statistics were down, perhaps. It can mean different things. It's got to be applied intelligently, and our consultants are always capable of helping you assess that in a productive way. But there's got to be again, that's exactly to Julie's point of your point, Julie, of accountability. Accountability means there are consequences.
Right.
And we live in an era where many people, frankly, they operate on an entitlement viewpoint, and even worse than that, a victim viewpoint.
Right.
I doubt if there's a single practice that might be listening to this that hasn't run into that in potential employees, which is why you need to find willing people that are eager to comply, and they're upbeat people, because upbeat people tend to not be that way.
Right.
And not so upbeat people tend to slide more easily into kind of a victim mentality. Look what you're doing to me. They do not help you build that team, because they don't respond in the best possible way to reward of an up statistic and a penalty of a down statistic.
Right. Exactly. Well, excellent. Well, I do want to keep these to our stated 30 minutes, and I do want to open up to any live questions that any of our audience does have. But thank you, Dave. Any last words here while people are attendees are drumming up what questions they may have?
Just on an ongoing basis, the owner as the kind of the goal finder, the top of the organization, needs to, for one thing, set a really good example of being upbeat and in good communication with staff, acknowledging people for a good job, noting when people haven't done a great job, but in an encouraging, positive way, and also continuously in a relevant way at staff meetings or morning musters or wherever, or even walking down the hall, communicate and promote the ideal scene, your mission statement, your core values. You don't just put those out there once and it's a one and done deal. It is a continuous create. The universe we live in is a universe of friction and entropy, and you don't just kick the can and it keeps going. You kick the can and then you catch up with it and you kick it again. And that's the way it works with conveying your purpose and keeping your purpose alive in the hearts and minds of your staff, because it's got to be, of course, alive in your own heart and mind.
Exactly.
Continuous thing.
Absolutely. Excellent. Well, here's our first question. This is from Reggie. They missed the 5 metrics. Can you restate them?
You betcha. Yeah, you probably keep these. The first one is production. What's the dollar value of what we are producing in our practice, our delivery? The value of our service delivered, in other words. Number 1. Number 2, collections. How much are we getting paid for this? Number 3, how many office visits are we seeing? How many patient visits? Depending on what kind of practice you have, you might measure it one way or the other. In other words, what's our volume of traffic coming through the practice? A substat of that would be how many new patients, or in veterinary medicine, how many new clients are we seeing? We want that constant new growth. And right next to that, of course, is how much repeat business are we seeing? How many reminder patients or clients are we seeing, or recall patients in dentistry are we seeing? We need those numbers to keep going up, and then of course your gross profit. Excuse me, your net
Net.
profit.
Mm-hmm.
Your net profit. What's left after you paid all the bills and the other places you put your money intentionally? And then there was another one that I mentioned a little bit later was which I think is really a very basic and important stat. All my clients keep it for sure, is the amount on a monthly basis, how much did we collect? What was our income for the month, our gross income, divided by how many people were here producing it. And by people, I mean full-time equivalents. So if you have 2 half-time people, that's 1 FTE, 1 full-time equivalent. So it gives you a ratio of how much per person you were generating ultimately in income. It's a very interesting quality stat. So those are they.
Excellent. Good. And while we're getting some more questions come in, I do want to let everyone know we offer a free practice analysis. This is completely free. There is no bait and switch, but we allow you to spend about 4 to 5 hours with our senior analyst, Alan Jackson, also known as AJ. He's been doing this for a very, very long time. Has met
45
with
hours?
4 to 5.
Oh, 4 to 5. Okay.
Thanks for the correct. Yeah. 4 to 5 over a number of meetings. They're set up to be about 1 hour meetings. And he's been doing this for has met with thousands of practice owners. And what he does is he helps you uncover holes, things that you're not seeing. If things aren't running well, something is going on. Either something is incorrect or something is missing, right? And why aren't you making the income you should be making? What is your biggest expense? And then gives you solutions that can help right away to help fix these problems. So I did throw a link in the chat there. You can just go ahead and click that and fill that out. Got another follow-up question for you, Dave, is what should the income divided by FTE be?
That varies depending on what kind of a practice you are, for one thing. I'll give you a very broad, general number, and that can vary also for a variety of reasons, depending on where you are geographically and demographically. If you're in New York City, the amount you need to generate to be really efficient is going to be very much higher than if you're in Winnemucca, Nevada, because your prices are different. So that will have an impact on what it is. But in very broad terms, in this day and age, I look for $12,000 to $13,000 per staff member being normally acceptable. It can often be pushed without difficulty up to 14,000, 15,000. Again, it depends on the kind of practice. If you're an orthodontic practice, it's going to be a lot higher than that. It's going to be $20,000 to $22,000 per person, and they can definitely push it higher than that in a really efficiently run orthodontic practice. Endodontic practices are more similar to orthodontic practices that way, into the 20s. So the best thing to do is to compute that stat for a while and get an idea of when you're being really productive, where does it fall? And you'll kind of get a sense of what your own range is. But those are some rough figures for you.
Excellent. And Kelly, to answer your question, it is divided by all of the staff, not just the producers.
Yes. Yeah, and it definitely includes the doctors. And any full-time and part-time people. Part-time people being counted as the decimal of how part-time they are.
Exactly. And Kelly, you are welcome. And Reggie, you're welcome too. And I believe earlier we had Susan from Houston. Hello, Susan. Great. We'll just hang out here for a little bit, see if there's any more questions that come through. Hopefully you guys have great holiday planned here if you celebrate Thanksgiving with some family and friends. It's always an enjoyable time. I enjoy food, but I also enjoy laughter and friends and family and special times. Okay, great. Well, it doesn't look like we have any more questions. Um, Thank you, Kelly. Yeah, thank you. Um, Appreciate everyone getting on. Glad a few of you had some questions. Again, there is that link for the free practice analysis. It's very useful. It's, we have a lot of individuals get a lot of relief up front. And good, we will just follow up with emails. We'll send you a replay of the webinar so you can have all of this information. And if you guys have any questions, you will have my email address. You can reach out directly to me as well. Thank you very much.
Ta-ta for now.